Alright, so what does it mean to be fluent in a language, right? Because so many of us want to become fluent in another language. We want to be able to speak it fluently, we hear all the time, but what does this actually mean? Because there's so many variations and so many different opinions of what fluency actually is in a language. So today we're going to be going over what I believe to be fluency and how it is kind of a subjective term, and there are different ways to think about it and different ways to qualify someone as fluent in one language or another. Before we get started though, if you are new to my channel, my name is Sarah and I teach how to learn any language. Alright, so I think most of us can agree that fluency is being able to communicate something clearly and articulately, whether that is through speaking and listening, so if you're having a conversation, or whether it is through writing and reading. So any one of those modes, and just being able to express yourself clearly and with ease. So like I'm speaking right now, I'm not having to think too much about what I'm saying, and it doesn't stress me out too much to speak this way. But of course, there are different interpretations of how fluency, even in this definition, can be applied to different levels of language abilities. So we're going to get into that a little bit more, and how fluency is really a subjective term, because what one person considers fluent is not always what another person considers fluent, and also because there are different areas of fluency. So this is my native language, English, and so I speak like a native speaker. However, just being a native speaker does not necessarily mean that I am well spoken or that I am educated, although I do happen to have degrees, so I would consider myself an educated English speaker. But that doesn't mean that I am fluent or not fluent, because there are fluent English speakers who have not gone to college. Like, you don't have to go to college, or you don't even have to go, all the way through high school to be a fluent speaker. But you do to have that academic level of speech or of writing and reading. So this is really where those degrees come in, and not degrees like school, but the degrees, the levels rather, of fluency. There is like a conversational level of fluency, which is kind of where my Spanish is. Like, I'm comfortable speaking and listening and reading and writing in pretty much any general context, but I don't necessarily have any specialized vocabulary like the medical field or with law or, something like that. Something where you have to specifically study that area, that jargon, to be able to communicate in that way. And I don't even have these vocabulary sometimes in English if I haven't studied a particular field, like let's say psychology. I don't have that vocabulary in Spanish or in English. So I'm fluent in the way that I use my language in my everyday speech and in academic settings, in English and Spanish in academic settings, but I don't have all of those vocabulary sets. So this is where fluency can become a little bit subjective. And it's really because of this fluid definition, and we generally think of fluency as just being able to communicate. Like, once you know a language, you know it. But it's really not quite that simple. And I hope that you can see why by thinking about these different levels. So think of it like when you are going through elementary school or middle school and high school, and even in your native language. So if you're going through, let's use the American school system, for example, because that's what I'm familiar with. And as you're going through, like, even a child is a fluent speaker, right? They are native, they speak fluently, they can express themselves easily, although not always correctly. They are considered fluent, but their speech or their writing is not at the same level as a high school graduate or a college graduate. So there are those different levels. And then with a second language or third language or whichever language, it's even more different, because now it's not quite the same progression as with a native speaker in a language. You have, yes, those levels, but you're not learning the same way as a native speaker, you know, going through years and years and years of study like that. Although you might be studying another language for many years, and most likely have if you've achieved any level of fluency, but you don't start learning the same way you start learning your native language. You start learning by using the skills that you already have in your native language. So your reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills, you start using those and applying them to your second language or third or whichever. And so it kind of shortcuts the process a little bit, and that's why we don't necessarily have to study for 12 years to become fluent in a language, although some people do. But yeah, so we can transfer those skills to our other language, and so that makes the fluency really complicated because we have eventually, you know, you reach a level where you can communicate clearly, and you might call yourself fluent because you have that ability to express yourself. Like we said in the beginning of this video, the definition for fluency, being able to articulate yourself easily and without too much stress, and, you know, pronouncing correctly and speaking correctly and all of that. But there are most likely going to be vocabulary words that you don't know, and just like even in your native language, there's going to be words you don't know. And so it's a different set of skills and a different level than the native language, but the key message here is that just because you're fluent in a language doesn't mean that you know everything there is to know about the language, because you're never going to know everything there is to know about, quite frankly, anything, because there's just always more. And the more you learn, usually the more you learn there is still to learn. So fluency is relative, and I would describe fluency as when you feel like you have mastered your skills, your language, well enough to communicate in the manner, in the situation where you need to. So if that is conversational, then when you are able to do that, you can consider yourself fluent in that area. Or if you need to communicate yourself in an academic context, then when you can do that, you're fluent in that area, and so on, in any area that you would learn. All right? So I know this is a very complicated subject, and I'm sure that we'll have some different opinions in the comment sections and all of that. Feel free, if you have an opinion of what fluency is and it is different, feel free to leave it down below. I will not be offended. There is no one right answer to this because, as I mentioned, it is extremely subjective, and really the key here is just to understand how to know when you're progressing in your language and how to be able to kind of label yourself as fluent so that you know what your level is and what you're striving for, and really just so that you know what your goal is and that it is attainable, because fluency doesn't mean that you know everything. It just means that you've reached a particular goal in your language abilities. Alright, and if you found the content in this video helpful, if it spoke to you in really understanding how language works and what fluency is, make sure to take a look at my website for some additional resources for understanding language and language learning in general, and I will see you guys back here next time. Bye!